Welcome back to this ministry in the wilderness. We're continuing on with the next entries from Matthew, which is following the conversations he had with his disciples about who people thought he was, and explaining that Simon, otherwise known as Peter, had the key to experiencing the kingdom. So put that in the context of this comes right after. This is the famous "Get thee behind me, Satan" encounter. Very much in opposition to "Upon this rock," meaning Peter, "I will build my church." Perhaps he was always meaning something different, and perhaps the author or the authors of Matthew were too. A reading from Matthew, chapter 16, verses 21 through 28. Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Jesus then said to his disciples, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now it's important to remember that we have a couple of thousand years of culture and history between us and the scriptures. A good portion of what we believe about heaven and hell came about from the literature and cultures through which our scriptures have journeyed. On top of that, written not in a native language, most speakers and the fact that everyone pretty much was illiterate, they had a very limited picture into the scriptures. And throughout history, most of the Orthodox churches, East and West, were the holders of the interpretations of the scripture. Milton, writing 1,000 years ago, gave us the image of the fall of Lucifer in Paradise Lost, a non-canonical and non-scriptural story to help explain how evil could exist outside of God's creation. Beings rebelled, and that started with the angels. On top of that, these were stories which came out of Jewish scriptures, and they were being interpreted by non-Jews without the benefit of volumes of Jewish commentary, which had been evolving in this story of the people from the people themselves. In today's scripture, after Jesus tells his followers that he would be killed by the scribes and the high priests, Simon, who is now known as Peter, rebukes him, saying he should not let this happen. After all, they'd gotten away with it from others in the past. Even in his hometown, Jesus was chased out and he had to run from the crowd. And Jesus says these famous words, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Now, the Satan Jesus is referring to is the Satan from the book of Job. Satan, a servant of God, who at God's behest brought troubles to Job, trials to test Job's faith. A tale not perhaps that really took place, but scripture that addresses that bad things happen even to righteous people. Now, Jesus knows what he faces because he thinks not of himself first. And because he thinks not of himself first, he can notice the way the wind blows. He can notice what's happening around him. He knows the reaction of his teachings, which is against temple Judaism. He knows what that has wrought and what that means for him. Simon Peter's asking him to walk away from it is an additional burden, another trial to test his faith, just like Satan did to Job. Don't add to my burdens, Peter. Simon Peter, who in just the last verses Jesus was saying he would build his community upon his faith. Don't add to my burdens, Peter. Have faith and support me, he is asking. Stop thinking about yourself. Simon Peter, though, when the time came, thought of himself. And in his fear, he denied Jesus 3 times. And then we get to the crux of the matter in regards to following Jesus. Just before he ended his last trip to Jerusalem. He entered into his last trip to Jerusalem. It was known as the Way in the earliest of days. And the crux of it was, stop thinking about yourselves. Take up the cross, the way of unconditional love, the hardest of paths to walk, and do what he does, Jesus. Listen to him, as we said in other homilies here. Almost all of the religions of Jesus' day, and today too, were in some way transactional. Offer to a deity for favor or forgiveness, good crops, children, prosperity, pay for transgressions, make atonement, give honor for the bounty you have received. But look for the most powerful deity to help, like Yahweh, who saved the Jews from the gods of the Egyptians. Look out for yourself and those you care about. That was the way of the religions of the day. Jesus was saying, look out for others and not yourself. If you are wrapped up in the things of the world, even your life, you will lose your way and block your connection with the divine. All things in the world are transitory. Life, love, and the essence of existence is available to you if you don't fill yourself up with the things of the self. Empty your cup a little bit. Jesus needed to die like all of us die, so that we may no longer fear death, so that we would do the work needed to be done, rather than waiting for God or Jesus to do it for us. Personal salvation is a heresy against the teachings of Jesus in today's scripture. The way had never been about you or your life before and after death. It is about love and making life better. Peter was asking him to forego that, to forego the work he came to do, forsake his connection to the consciousness, all because of Simon Peter's fears. And then we get a couple of lines from Jesus, the man of his times, who thought the end times were upon them, who thought there were end times. A man who came from a transactional religion that shaped his expression. Every one of his disciples has tasted death. Everyone, all the disciples, the apostles, every follower for the last couple of thousand years, everyone has tasted death. Because death is a part of life. Many of the disciples may have had a spiritual awakening to see the reality of the kingdom of heaven in our midst before they died. Let's hope that was true. But they all died. Trials come for us all, and not because we deserve them or are being tested by some pernicious God. Trials happen, and a loving God is with us through them, as a loving God is with us in our joys and triumphs. Jesus asks us not to add to the trials of another for our own selfish reasons, like not wanting a loved one to die, which basically was what Peter was asking. I don't want you to go, Lord. If you hear the word that you are to put yourself and your desires first, it is not of Jesus. It is not the way. If others put themselves before you, they are not walking in the path of righteousness. They may be walking a very human path, most assuredly so. However, God's love, Christ's love, is without condition, the hardest form of all. You don't need to be loyal to some person or personality or even to some religious faith, putting that before you and your connection with God. However, this message of unconditional love is often taught as no longer being relevant in today's world. Well, it wasn't really relevant in Jesus' world either, but he still taught it. And it's needed today more than ever, lest we awaken and see that the world's trials are too much for us. Life will continue through that suffering, with us or without us. If you want to see the divine along the way, make room for that. And use love as the key, for such is the way of divine things. Just a sliver is enough to let the light in. Make room for God's love. For Jesus' sake, if nothing else, let love in. Amen. As usual, if you found this homily beneficial, make sure to like and subscribe by clicking the subscribe button below. I pray that this endeavor will be meaningful to you and that you will share your journey with others. We may exist in the wilderness, but we are not alone here, rest assured. Leave a comment if you want and come on back to this channel in the wilderness. I remain yours in faith until next time. Blessings to you all.